There is a question that haunted Michael Jordan for 3 years straight, a question that kept him awake in hotel rooms across America, a question that his opponents whispered loud enough for him to hear every single time he walked off a playoff court in defeat. The question was simple, brutal, and designed to break a man. What if the greatest player who ever lived simply wasn't good enough to win when it mattered most? Before I tell you what happened on May 27, 1991, the night that changed everything and silenced every single voice that ever doubted him, you need to understand exactly how deep the wound went. Because what Jordan did to Detroit that night wasn't just basketball. It was a reckoning. It was years of humiliation, pain, blood, and broken pride being returned in a single magnificent act of redemption. And it started long before that night. It started with a team that didn't just want to beat Michael Jordan. They wanted to erase him. The year is 1988. Michael Jordan is 25 years old, already the most electrifying player the NBA has ever seen. He has just won his first regular season MVP award. He has just won Defensive Player of the Year. He is averaging numbers that make coaches cover their eyes and pray. He drives to the basket with a combination of speed and power that seems to violate the physics of what a 6'6" human being is capable of. And when the defense closes in, he simply goes over it. He is, by every measurable standard, the best basketball player alive. And none of it means anything because there is a wall standing between him and the place he needs to go. And that wall has a name. The Detroit Pistons, the Bad Boys. And they are not a basketball team, they are a philosophy. They are a decision made in the offices of the Palace of Auburn Hills that the only way to stop something supernatural is to make it bleed. Chuck Daly is a chess player disguised as a basketball coach. He stands on the sideline in his perfectly tailored suits, watching Jordan move, watching those long legs, those impossible hands, that engine that seems to never run out of fuel. And he doesn't see something to admire. He sees a problem to be solved. So he sits down with his assistants, Ron Rothstein and Dick Versace, and they build something no one in the history of professional basketball had ever built before, a defensive system designed for a single human being. They call it the Jordan Rules. And the Jordan Rules aren't subtle. Force him left, double him immediately, make every drive to the basket a collision, make every trip to the paint a gauntlet, make him feel every single inch of the floor under his feet, make him tired, make him angry, make him feel like the court is shrinking around him, like the game itself is conspiring to diminish him. Key operatives: Bill Laimbeer, a center who plays defense like a man settling a personal grudge, a 7-footer who hits hard and then stares at you to make sure you registered it. Rick Mahorn, built like a piece of industrial machinery, a power forward whose specialty is the kind of contact that leaves bruises you don't see until the next morning. Dennis Rodman, perhaps the most gifted rebounder and defensive irritant the game has ever produced, a human being who seems to find psychological warfare more satisfying than scoring. And Isaiah Thomas, the point guard, the leader, the brain of the operation, a man with a smile that seems permanently affixed to his face even as he organizes the systematic destruction of his opponents. Thomas is 6 feet tall in a league of giants, and he is compensated for every inch he doesn't have, with a competitive fury that borders on pathological. He doesn't play against the opponent in front of him. He plays against the idea of the opponent, and the idea he plays against every time he faces the Bulls is this: Michael Jordan is not a team. Michael Jordan is a single point of failure. Break that point, and everything falls. That spring of 1988, Jordan drops 59 points on the Pistons on Easter Sunday in Detroit. 59 points. The crowd goes from raucous to bewildered to something approaching reverence, because what they are watching is a human being operating in a dimension that ordinary human beings do not occupy. He is 21 of 27 from the field. He makes 17 of 19 free throws. He adds 6 assists, 4 rebounds, 2 steals, 2 blocks. The Bulls win 112-110 in what is one of the most dominant individual performances in the history of a sport built on dominant individual performances. And in the Detroit locker room afterward, Chuck Daly stands in front of his players and says not one word for a very long time. Then, "This will never happen again. Whatever we have to do, this will never happen again." The Jordan Rules are born in that silence. In the playoffs that year, the Pistons show exactly what they mean. The series is physical in a way that the word physical fails to capture. Jordan fights through screens, absorbs hits that would send ordinary men to the training table, and keeps scoring. But the Bulls are essentially a one-man show, and the Pistons know it. They collapse every defense around Jordan, make the game ugly, make the game slow, and wait for the humans around him to succumb to the pressure. They do. The Bulls lose 4-1. Detroit moves on to the finals. Jordan shakes their hands afterward in the handshake line, one player at a time, and his face gives nothing away. But in the locker room, later, when the reporters have left and the equipment managers are quietly packing bags, Jordan sits in front of his locker for a very long time. Already, the narrative is forming in the press boxes and the sports bars and the corner offices of every major sports network in America. Michael Jordan is spectacular. Michael Jordan is extraordinary. Michael Jordan cannot win. The off-season of 1988 is a quiet war that nobody writes about because nothing visible is happening. Jordan goes back to North Carolina and works. He adds weight, he studies film, he watches the Pistons win their first championship, and he lets that image burn into him the way only Michael Jordan knows how to use pain. As fuel. Not anger, not resentment, something colder and more useful. Determination that has been compressed into something nearly structural, something that sits in the body like weight training, growing denser over time. The Bulls come back in 1989 with more around him. Scottie Pippen is beginning to show what he is capable of. A wing player with guard skills and the defensive instincts of someone twice as experienced, someone who can guard multiple positions and who is slowly emerging as a second engine. Horace Grant is developing in the paint. They push the Pistons harder than anyone has pushed them. They have a 2-1 series lead in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Jordan can feel it. The thing he wants most is right there, 3 feet away, and for the first time it seems genuinely within reach, and then Detroit takes it back. Game by game, hit by hit. The Jordan rules tighten like a vice. Joe Dumars shuts Jordan down in stretches. Laimbeer and Mohorn take turns making the paint into a war zone. The Bulls lose in 6. Detroit goes on to win their first NBA championship, sweeping the Los Angeles Lakers in stunning fashion. Jordan sits in the locker room after the series-ending loss and says almost nothing. There are reporters at the door. There are cameras waiting for the image of a fallen king. He shakes hands with the Pistons. He says the right things to the cameras. He walks out. And somewhere inside that long, quiet walk, something calcifies. Something that will not be dissolved until it is satisfied. 15 pounds of muscle over that summer, not for aesthetics, not for vanity, because Jordan has diagnosed the problem with the precision of a surgeon. The Pistons are beating the Bulls not with skill but with force, and force can be countered. He works with a trainer named Tim Grover, a man who will later describe the Michael Jordan of those summer sessions as unlike any athlete he has ever worked with, not because of the physical gifts, though those are extraordinary, but because of the psychological intensity Jordan brings to the work. Every morning at 6, every session pushed to the edge of what the body can give. Grover says Jordan never once asked how long the workout would be. He only asked when they could start. The extra weight is not decoration. It is architecture. Jordan is redesigning himself to survive the punishment of the Jordan rules without losing a step, without losing the explosiveness that makes him impossible to contain on the perimeter. He wants to be able to take the hit and still finish at the rim. He wants to be the thing that moves through the wall instead of bouncing off it. He is going to become something they cannot absorb. He is going to make his body into an argument that cannot be dismissed. He comes back in 1990, and it is the most brutal series yet. 7 games. Eastern Conference Finals. He averages 32 points, 7 rebounds, 6 assists on 47% shooting. He is transcendent individually. There are games in that series where he is simply unkillable, where the Pistons throw everything they have at him and he simply gets up and scores again. And still the Pistons find a way. Game 7, Jordan scores 31 of his team's 74 points. His teammates, overwhelmed by the occasion and the physical punishment of Detroit's defense, manage just 43 between them. It is not enough. The Pistons win on their home floor, and they will go on to win their second consecutive NBA championship, As the final buzzer sounds and the celebration begins around him, Jordan does something that you need to sit with for a moment. He shakes their hands. Again. He goes to every Piston one by one and he shakes their hands. Even the ones who put him on the floor without apologizing. Even the ones who talked through the series about how Jordan was soft, how he couldn't win, how his individual brilliance was ultimately a weakness. Even Isaiah Thomas, who takes his hand with that permanent smile and says something that Jordan later says he cannot remember precisely because he was trying so hard not to react to it. Every handshake, every time, because Jordan understood, even then, even in the worst moment, that how you lose defines what you become. You can lose with bitterness, and that bitterness will corrode you. Or you can lose with your eyes open, which is harder and more useful, because losing with your eyes open means you are still learning. Now stop, because here is where the story turns. Here is where the plot twist lives, the one that even the most devoted Jordan fans sometimes forget, the one that reframes everything that comes after. After 3 straight playoff eliminations, after years of being the most gifted player in the world and having nothing to show for it, there was a very real conversation happening in the sports world. Not whispered anymore, said plainly in newspapers, on radio broadcasts, in the analysis rooms of every major sports outlet in America. The conversation was this: Michael Jordan might be the reason the Bulls can't win. Not because he isn't great, because he is too great, too dominant, too deeply convinced that the way to win is to take the game on his own shoulders and simply be better than everyone else. The critics were saying something far more cutting than Jordan isn't good enough. They were saying Jordan's greatness might be the problem. That a team built around one superstar, even the most extraordinary superstar in the history of the sport, cannot win a championship in the NBA. That basketball is fundamentally a team game, and Jordan was fundamentally refusing to play it as one. And this is where Phil Jackson enters the story. Not with a speech, not with a motivational poster on the locker room wall. Phil Jackson enters the story with a diagram and a book and a series of conversations with Michael Jordan that were, by every account of people who were present for them, among the most important conversations in the history of the sport. Phil Jackson is a student of Zen Buddhism, of Native American philosophy, of the literature of team dynamics and shared consciousness. He believes that a group of people committed to a collective goal can access something that transcends individual talent, that 5 players moving as one organism are more powerful than any single genius moving alone, no matter how gifted that genius is. He brings this belief into the Bulls' locker room, and he directs it specifically at the man who has been carrying the franchise on his back for 6 years. He sits across from the best player alive and says something that, paraphrased, sounds like this: "You can score 60 points and we can still lose. Or you can score 25 points the right way, make the men around you better, make them believe in themselves, and we win a championship." The question is not whether you are good enough. The question is whether you are wise enough to let the game be bigger than you. There is a version of this conversation that gets told as though Jordan simply said yes, and that was that. The truth is more complicated. Jordan pushes back. He argues. He points to the numbers, to the scoring titles, to the individual achievements, to the evidence that his way of playing works. And Jackson does not argue with the numbers. He agrees with them. He says, your individual greatness is beyond debate, but individual greatness is not a championship. He shows Jordan tape of the Pistons, not of Jordan being stopped, but of Jordan's teammates watching, waiting, ball watching, while Jordan carries the entire offense on his back like a man trying to move a building by himself. He shows Jordan what the floor looks like from above when the triangle is running correctly. 5 players moving in concert, 5 reads happening simultaneously, 5 players making 5 defenders choose, and the correct choice always open, because the incorrect ones have all been occupied. Jordan watches this footage in silence, and something shifts. Not immediately, not all at once, but over the course of that off-season and the beginning of the 1990-91 season, something genuine changes in how Michael Jordan plays basketball. He still scores. He still takes over games when it is necessary. But he is playing chess now, not checkers. He is playing the game that Phil Jackson was always asking him to play, and the Pistons' entire defensive system was never designed to stop chess. He chooses to become something he had never been before. a player who makes the game easy for everyone else, whose greatness expresses itself not in the score column, but in the spaces he creates, the decisions he simplifies, the confidence he generates in men who might otherwise doubt themselves. And that choice, that single act of surrender to a higher idea of what winning looks like, is the thing the Pistons never see coming. The 1990-91 Chicago Bulls are a different organism. Jordan is still the engine. But now Scottie Pippen has genuinely arrived, long, versatile, ferocious on defense, capable of guarding 4 positions and initiating offense with the composure of a player twice his experience. Horace Grant is a bulldozer in the paint who absorbs contact and keeps moving. John Paxson provides the kind of clean, reliable shooting that defenses have to respect. B.J. Armstrong adds youth and quickness. Bill Cartwright provides interior toughness and the kind of screen-setting presence that creates traffic the Jordan rules cannot fully navigate. Phil Jackson's triangle offense turns the floor into a living geometry problem. It has no predetermined stars, no guaranteed reads, no single point of entry that a defense can clog without opening something else. It breathes, it adapts, it punishes overcommitment and rewards patience. And it has been designed at its core to do one specific thing: make the Jordan rules obsolete by removing the single point of failure they were built to exploit. The Bulls finished the regular season 61-21, best record in the Eastern Conference. Detroit finishes 50-32. For the first time in the history of this rivalry, Chicago holds home court advantage over Detroit. The math has changed, and everyone who has watched this rivalry knows what that means. The Eastern Conference Finals begin on May 19, 1991, at Chicago Stadium. The old building at 1800 West Madison Street, with its tight sightlines and compressed noise, becomes something close to a physical force that night. The crowd has waited 3 years for this specific matchup on this specific court, and the sound they produce when the Bulls take the floor is the sound of 3 years of accumulated longing being released at once. But in the Detroit locker room, the bad boys don't flinch at crowd noise. They have played in hostile buildings their entire championship run. Isaiah Thomas tapes his wrists with the same methodical calm he always brings to this ritual, and when he looks up at his teammates, he says what he has always said before facing the Bulls: "They have not solved us. They will not tonight." And the Pistons believe him, because Isaiah Thomas has earned that belief with 2 championship rings and years of delivering exactly what he promised. Game 1. The Bulls execute the triangle with a precision and pace that creates immediate chaos in Detroit's defensive scheme. Jordan is brilliant, but his brilliance now has a different texture. It is purposeful rather than dominant, distributed rather than centralized. He takes what is offered, passes when the defense gives him a reason to pass, and scores when it is the geometrically correct decision rather than the emotionally satisfying one. The Pistons' defense keeps reading Jordan, and Jordan keeps not being exactly where the defense expects him. The Bulls win Game 1 convincingly. Game 2 follows the same pattern. When the series shifts to the Palace of Auburn Hills for Game 3, the Pistons find reserves of intensity they have summoned before in moments of crisis. Dennis Rodman is a force of nature on the glass. Laimbeer plays with the desperate violence of a man who senses the end of something. Isaiah Thomas, 30 years old and perhaps running on sheer will, plays the game of his life for stretches. But the Bulls answer everything. Every lead Detroit builds, Chicago erases. Every Jordan rule applied opens a gap somewhere else, and this team punishes every gap. The Bulls win Game 3 in Detroit, 3-0. Back in Chicago for Game 4, May 27, 1991. The city has been building toward this morning for 3 years, and everyone in it seems to feel it. The cab drivers and the office workers and the kids skipping school to watch on television, and the old men in the barbershops who remember watching the Bulls before Jordan, before any of this meant anything. The morning of the game, Jordan arrives early at practice. His teammates watch him move through his warm-up routine, and they can all feel it. That stillness, that locked-in quality that the people closest to him have always recognized. Pippen finishes a line of free throws and comes to stand next to Jordan at the baseline. They shoot in silence for a moment. "Tonight's the night, Mike," Pippen says quietly. Jordan looks at him, nods once, says nothing. goes back to the ball. It is all the conversation they need. The tip-off happens, and the first possession tells you everything. Jordan brings the ball up, reads the defense, finds Pippen cutting baseline, and Pippen catches and finishes cleanly before Laimbeer can recover. Chicago Stadium goes up. 30 seconds later, Jordan posts Dennis Rodman on the left block, turns baseline and puts up a floater that kisses the glass and drops. The triangle is breathing, moving, finding angles that the Jordan rules were not designed to address. In the second quarter, Horace Grant catches an entry pass in the post, turns and drives through contact for 2 points plus the foul. The Pistons can feel the ground shifting under them. They make adjustments. They trap Jordan earlier. They extend their defense to contest the triangle reads, and every adjustment opens something new because that is what the triangle does. It consumes defensive adjustments like fuel. By halftime, the Bulls are up 14 points in what will become a final score of 115-94. The third quarter is the one the building will remember. Jordan, who has been surgically perfect in his distribution, decides it is time. Not angry, not emotional, simply time. The sequence goes like this: pull-up jumper over Dumars, clean. Then a baseline drive, absorbed contact from Laimbeer, right-handed finish that seems to hang in the air too long, and lands. Then a steal, outlet pass to Pippen, 2-on-1 break, pass back to Jordan cutting, reverse layup left-handed. 3 possessions, 8 points. Chicago Stadium has been loud all night, but in this stretch it becomes something else. Not crowd noise exactly, but the sound of a city releasing something it has been holding for 3 years. Jordan stands at the top of the key after the third basket, and Isaiah Thomas looks at him across the court for a moment that neither of them will ever fully describe. It is not a look of defeat exactly. It is a look of recognition. The look of a man acknowledging that what he built to stop something has been dismantled by the very thing it was built to stop, not through force, but through intelligence. And that intelligence was built in the fires Detroit lit. The fourth quarter winds down, and the lead is insurmountable. With 7.9 seconds left on the clock, something happens that no one in the building and no one watching across America fully anticipates. Isaiah Thomas, Bill Laimbeer, and Mark Aguirre stand up from the Detroit bench and begin walking off the court. Not because of an ejection, not because of an injury, walking off, leaving the floor before the buzzer, before the handshake line, before the ritual that sport requires of its participants. Thomas walks toward the tunnel with his head lowered, and the crowd at Chicago Stadium watches in a moment of collective disbelief, followed by a noise that has triumph and contempt and vindication in it, in roughly equal measure. Joe Dumars stays. Vinnie Johnson stays. John Sally stays. They walk to the Bulls and shake hands with every one of them. But the Bad Boys, as an organization and an identity, are already gone into the tunnel. And in walking off that court, they write the final sentence of their own story, not as champions who passed the torch with dignity, but as men who could not bear to hold it a moment longer than they had to. Jordan watches Thomas disappear, and he does not chase him. He does not call after him. He stands at center court, and Phil Jackson approaches and puts a hand on his shoulder, and in the photographs from that moment, Jordan's face has an expression that is almost impossible to name. It is not triumph exactly, it is not relief. It is the particular expression of a man whose inner accounting has finally balanced. A debt that was owed to him over 3 years of playoff defeats and handshakes that tasted like defeat, now settled in full. He will describe it later in a 1992 interview, with words that have been quoted in every documentary and every retrospective about this era. We embarrassed them. To sweep them 4-zip, it was embarrassing. Defending champions, embarrassing. It was like good overriding evil. He is not performing. He is not being gracious in an ungenerous way. He has earned the right to say exactly what he means, because he shook those hands every time they beat him, every single time, even when it cost him something to do it. The night before Game 4, there is a version of events that people close to Jordan have described over the years, in different ways and from different angles. It involves Jordan sitting alone in his hotel room for a significant amount of time, in the particular quiet that precedes enormous occasions, And in that quiet, he allows himself to think about the full length of the road, about 1988, about the Easter Sunday 59 points that meant nothing because they still went home in 5, about 1989, and the 2-1 lead that felt like destiny right up until it wasn't, about 1990 and the 31 points in Game 7 and the locker room afterward, and the specific sensation of shaking hands with people who have just taken something from you. He thinks about his father, James Jordan, who flew to every single one of those playoff games and watched his son perform at a level that should have been sufficient and somehow never was. He thinks about Tex Winter, drawing the triangle on a chalkboard for the 100th time, explaining again why giving up the ball is the highest expression of competitive intelligence. He thinks about Phil Jackson's question, "Do you want to be great, or do you want to win?" He had always thought those were the same thing. Now he understands that they are not. Being great is about yourself. Winning is about everyone in the room. And being willing to be great in service of everyone in the room, that is the thing that Detroit could not stop, because that is the thing they never saw coming. He goes to sleep. He wakes up on May 27, 1991. He goes to work. The sweep sends Chicago to the NBA Finals, where the Los Angeles Lakers await with Magic Johnson in his final full season, James Worthy still a force, and the full weight of the Showtime era's legacy behind them. The Bulls win in 5 games. Jordan averages 31 points, 11 assists, 6 rebounds on 56% shooting. He wins his first Finals MVP. He holds the trophy on the court at the Forum in Los Angeles and cannot stop crying. These are the famous photographs. Jordan on his knees with the trophy against his chest, his father James's arms around him. Not the tears of someone who has proven others wrong, the tears of someone who has finally proven himself right, in himself, about what was possible if he trusted the process and the people around him, and the simple radical idea that the best player in the world operating within a team was more powerful than the best player in the world trying to carry the world alone. James Jordan holds his son on that court, and neither of them says anything for a long time. They don't need to. Everything that needed to be said has just been said over the course of 4 years. In the sweat of off-season training sessions, in the silence of hotel rooms after losses, in 15 pounds of muscle and 1 decision to trust. 6 championships followed the sweep of Detroit. 2 three-peats, separated by a retirement and a comeback and a season of minor league baseball that still baffles analysts who try to explain it through the lens of conventional ambition. But that is the thing about Michael Jordan. He was never operating according to conventional ambition. He was always operating according to his own internal framework, which was more complex and more demanding than anything the outside world could fully map. The 1991 championship is followed by 1992 and 1993, and then the hiatus, and then 1996, 1997, 1998. 6 rings, 6 Finals MVP awards, the greatest dynasty of the era. And none of it happens without Detroit. This is the thing that basketball historians return to again and again, because it is the thing that feels most important about this story, beyond the box scores and the highlights. The Detroit Pistons spent 3 years doing everything in their power to prevent Michael Jordan from becoming a champion. They employed the smartest defensive scheme ever devised for a single player. They drafted physical specimens who could absorb the physical cost of making Jordan's life miserable every time he touched the floor. They built a culture of competitive brutality that was, in its own way, a form of excellence, because you do not win back-to-back NBA championships without understanding winning at the deepest level. And in doing all of that, they created the exact conditions that forced Michael Jordan to become the player who couldn't be stopped. The Jordan rules produced Jordan. The bad boys built the dynasty that ended them. John Salley, who played for both franchises at different points in his career, said it decades later, with the directness of a man who has had a long time to think about it. We toughened him up. He got stronger because of us. Every word of that is true, and Salley is smart enough to know that the strength they built was the instrument of their own destruction. Isaiah Thomas, in the years since the rivalry ended, has spoken about Jordan with a complexity that defies easy characterization. There is admiration in what he says. There is also the specific grief of a man who competed at the very highest level and was still found insufficient. He says Jordan was the greatest player he ever faced. He says the Bulls of 1991 were the best team he ever played against. And then he says something that speaks directly to what this story is really about. We made it hard for him on purpose. That was the job. And he found a way. He found a way. 6 words that contain 3 years of defeat, 15 pounds of muscle, an entire offensive system designed around trust, and one night in May when the wall finally came down. There is something in this story that does not belong to basketball. Something that belongs to anyone who has been told they can't, who has been told their talent isn't the right kind of talent, who has been the best at what they do and still come up short, because the world they're operating in was organized specifically to stop them. The answer Jordan gives is not the simple motivational version. It does not say, believe in yourself and you will win. It says something harder and more honest. It says, the losses done correctly are preparation. It says the people trying to stop you are, without knowing it, building you. It says, trust is not weakness. For someone as gifted as Jordan, learning to trust his teammates was the single most difficult and most important thing he ever did. And it says that when the wall finally comes down, you will know it. Not because someone tells you, because you will walk into the building on the night it happens, and your eyes will feel different, and the people next to you will feel it too, and your opponents will sense it the moment the game begins. The Detroit Pistons walked off the court on May 27, 1991, and the basketball world criticized them for it. Isaiah Thomas would later say, in a moment of genuine reflection, that he wishes they had stayed and shaken hands. That in retrospect, the way they left said something about who they were at that moment that he would change if he could. But even that act of departure, graceless, bitter, unchampioned, told a truth about what had just happened. It said, we know that what just swept us is not going to stop here. We know that the thing we built to destroy him has produced something we cannot stand here and look in the eye. We made him, and now we cannot watch him become what we made him into. So they left, and in leaving, they became the final frame of his origin story, the last obstacle before the dynasty began. If you've watched this story and something in it spoke to you, leave a comment below. Tell us the moment that caught you. Tell us about the wall you've been up against, the thing that keeps saying no, the opponent who beat you and made you shake their hand and walk back to your locker room alone. Those stories matter. They matter because sport at its highest level is not about sport at all. It is about what human beings are capable of when the conditions are exactly difficult enough. The bad boys made the conditions exactly difficult enough, and what grew in those conditions was Michael Jordan, fully made, completely realized, unstoppable in the way that only people who have survived and transformed their defeats are truly unstoppable. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. Every week we come back to these stories, the ones underneath the highlights, the ones that happened in hotel rooms the night before and in locker rooms the moment after, the ones that explain why the great ones are great in a way that has nothing to do with natural talent, and everything to do with what they chose to do when natural talent alone was not enough. Michael Jordan was told he couldn't beat Detroit. He was beaten by Detroit 3 times in a row. He used every single piece of that beating to build something that couldn't be beaten. And when the moment finally came, when the wall came down at last on May 27, 1991, in a building full of people who had been waiting for exactly this, he didn't celebrate by talking. He let the game speak. 4 straight wins, 115-94. And a city that had waited 3 years finally had its answer. The only answer that ever really lasts. Not the loudest answer. Not the most dramatic. The most complete one. The one built from losses that were processed honestly, from adjustments made without ego, from the willingness to be taught by defeat, again and again and again, until the teaching was complete. Jordan was taught by Detroit. He graduated on May 27, 1991, in front of 20,000 people who finally got to witness what 3 years of losing had quietly been building. You carry this story with you because it belongs to you as much as it belongs to him. We'll see you next week.